attention to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11th, 2001, and a whole lot more. This is 9/11 Free Fall. Good evening, everyone. I'm Andy Steele. Tonight's interview is with Fran Shure. She's one of the psychological experts in AE 9/11 Truth's documentary, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out. And in this interview, she covers a lot of ground, including her latest series of articles, which are still being published up at ae911truth.org. They're called Why Do Good People Become Silent or Worse About 9/11? As well, she explores the psychological impact that 9/11 and, of course, the truth of 9/11 have had on American society, and she provides some advice to 9/11 Truth activists on how to stay happy in the face of the current situation and how to alleviate stress and avoid activist burnout. So this is interesting to say the least, and it's a long interview, so I'll be playing that for you in just a minute. First, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all of the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We're going to do that starting now. In the following interview, Fran Shure and I discussed the topic of psychology in relation to 9/11 Truth. Just a quick reminder, as always, AE 9/11 Truth's mission just focuses on the science of the building destructions in New York on 9/11. So the opinions expressed on the show about other aspects of the 9/11 crime, such as who may have been responsible for 9/11, are strictly those of the guests and occasionally myself, and don't necessarily reflect those of AE 9/11 Truth.
Fran Shure has worked as a business owner, a licensed professional counselor specializing in depth psychology, and an adjunct instructor at Naropa University. She has long worked for world peace and a sustainable environment. She's co-founder of Colorado 9/11 Truth, is one of the 9/11 Consensus Panel members, and is listed with medical professionals for 9/11 Truth. She is the mother of 4 and a grandmother of 8 grandchildren. Frances, welcome to 9/11 Free Fall.
Thank you so much, Andy.
Now, I want our audience to know a little bit more about you. So can you elaborate on your background and talk about some of the stuff that you have done in your career, just kind of day in, day out, the kind of issues you helped people tackle?
Sure. And, what I might want to do, too, because, I've also, in that bio you just read, I've declared that I'm a business owner. So I have done more than worked as a psychotherapist. I also, I thought that's the only thing I was going to do in life. And then I realized I need to make enough money to become financially independent. And so I did this by becoming a landscape designer and contractor. And I worked for about 30 years with my own business, and that's how I could make enough money to retire. In the meantime, I also worked as a psychotherapist, and this was my they were both my loves, really, but I love creating beauty, which is what the landscape did for me, and I love having depth conversations and helping people heal at the deepest level. And I just value that so much. And so what I would do as a psychotherapist when people were open to it is people would regress back to their childhoods, their infancies, eventually even their birth, and re-experience traumas that they had sustained in their lives that was causing them major problems in their life. And by re-experiencing those traumas, they became free of them so that they didn't run their lives unconsciously anymore. So that's what I mean by depth psychology. It's not just talk therapy. It's experiential therapy. And so that's pretty much what I did. I taught a therapeutic modality called holotropic breath work, which was devised by Czechoslovakian psychiatrist Stanislav Grof and his wife Christina. I became certified in that, and then I taught that at Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado. And again, it's a very experiential psychotherapy. It's not just talking about issues. It's experiencing your issues and literally becoming free of them. So that's pretty much what I did as a professional.
Well, how appropriate your background bringing it to this movement, because that is what America is experiencing as a whole. And it's kind of interesting if you look at countries or even just the humanity in general as one collective person made up of all, the tiny little souls that make up the earth coming together as one type of person. You can apply a lot of these same principles, at least in my opinion, to a nation and what we are suffering. And I've heard people, and I'll ask you to comment on this a little bit later, or even now if you want to, but I've heard people reference, the situation that we're facing now with 9/11, and with people in denial over what really happened that day, even though the evidence is so obvious. They've compared it to almost like a molestation case where the family gets divided, nobody wants to talk about it, but a lot of times the victim who speaks out gets persecuted for doing that. And these are deep traumas that America suffered as a result, and I compare I look at one of the greatest tragedies from that day as being the divisions that were created among people and all these psychological problems that were created in our society by people having to live a lie, having to vigorously defend a lie, and then people being at odds with each other when this controversy comes up. So I'm going to ask you if you want to, go ahead and comment on what I just brought to the table there. But also, too, I want you to tell our audience, how did you personally awaken to the controlled demolition evidence, and what prompted you to take action?
Okay. Do you want me to comment first on what you just said?
Sure.
Yeah. What you said is accurate in my opinion. When 9/11 happened, I think the horror of it, the shock of it, even though we didn't know, many of us didn't know at that time that it was a false flag operation, it activated some of our old traumas, just the things, the traumas that I worked with as a professional. We saw death happening to thousands of our fellow human beings in those few seconds when those towers came down. And we, if we have old traumas, and it's my firm belief that most of us do carry old traumas within us, unknown to us usually, that those traumas can become activated. And what's interesting is that when those traumas are activated, we may not remember them, but the feelings come up of fear and horror. And what's interesting is that activation of old traumas can manifest itself in many ways. They can manifest itself by people shutting down, not wanting to talk about it, and especially if they find information that says that 9/11 was a false flag operation that was perpetrated by elements within our government. I mean, these are our parent figures, the government. So this can be so activating to those traumas that people want to shut down that information, not listen to it, not talk about 9/11 at all, because it reminds them of their death. And or of being abused in some way. Or it can do the opposite. It can make us very hypervigilant, and that's where the activists come in. We may have our traumas activated too, and instead of shutting down, we want to tell the world about this abuse going on in our family. And we can become very pushy sometimes about that, because it's so urgent. And so our traumas are activated as well, and it also affects how we approach other people. So that's my comment on that part of it, but I think it's absolutely accurate to compare individual the individual psyche, the individual shadow, one might say, with the collective shadow. People want to do anything but face their shadow, and yet if they do not, they remain imprisoned by that shadow running their lives unconsciously. So then how I woke up, as you say, how did I discover 9/11 was a false flag operation? And I have to say, I did believe the official story. I did watch the buildings come down on TV. I was horrified. And yet something I remember saying to the person that was with me, I don't believe that this could have happened without somebody knowing about it and allowing it to happen. That just came out of my mouth. And I knew nothing about controlled demolition. I knew nothing about the air defense and what they were supposed to do. It was more intuitive. And yet I believed it was Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. And I was helping people understand. I was taking speakers around trying to help people understand, well, why do they hate us? Well, they hate us because of blowback. They hate us because of what we've done to their countries. And then I got information that showed me that, and this was through Michael Rupert, by the way, his Truth and Lies about 9/11. And then the next thing I did is read Nafis Ahmed's book, The War on Freedom. And my world was, my jaw dropped. My world was pretty much turned upside down. And I read that book several times. I watched that video several times. And I got busy and started contacting my representative in Denver. Then it wasn't until actually 2004 when the controlled demolition aspect became clear to me. Before that, I had learned more about the air defense failure and the intelligence failure. And then in 2004, I remember very clearly seeing a video and understanding that those twin towers were coming down at or near free fall speed. We thought it was at free fall speed then, and now we've kind of modified that to say it was more like 2/3 free fall speed, which is close enough. And I knew intuitively, I know the physical world enough to know that cannot happen without something removing the structure beneath the building to allow it to fall at that rate. The physical world is something I'm very tuned into, and even though I'm not a physicist, I did major in the sciences, and I'm very clear that could not happen without something removing the structure, and that had to be controlled demolition. So my jaw dropped at that point, and then I realized very clearly at that point that this was not a let it happen on purpose event. This was a make it happen on purpose event.
I'm listening to, and I listened to your first, discussion on my own comments, and you talk about how people's buttons, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but how people's buttons get pushed by this event, and it triggers different reactions out of them. And you have the folks who either clam up and don't say anything, but you've also got the activists who get it immediately and get very passionate about this. You kind of blown my mind because I never thought about that aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And it's just interesting, though, is that why are there no, and again, I know this is kind of speculation because we can't get inside everybody in the government and in the media's heads here, but why aren't there enough of those people who have those buttons in them that might cause some people to become 9/11 truth activists? Why aren't there enough of those people in the media and in the government to have brought this to light, to have gotten justice for this, to speak out and do the right thing in those positions?
Well, I hope I'm going to answer your question. What comes to me to say is that we have more than internal forces working against us in this movement. This movement is very unique in that we have both internal and external forces working against us. And yet our success has been amazing, even in spite of that. We have the internal forces of the fear that arises. So we either clam up or we get very, very active from an anxious kind of standpoint. Our anxiety drives us to become very, very active. So those are the internal forces. The internal forces are also fear that we will be ostracized by our friends and our family, fear that we won't be popular, we won't be liked. Also, there's the aspect of the big lie, which I think is a really big one. This is just too big. We can't believe that our government or elements within our government could ever do such a thing. What monster would do such a thing is a phrase I've heard a lot. And so those are the internal forces. The external forces are the perpetrators themselves and the people who are covering it up, who are working against us to get this out. And that includes the media. The media has been quite controlled for a long time now, and that is not something we can prove, but we can point to a lot of evidence in that direction. And one piece of that evidence is just the fact that we know that Operation Mockingbird did exist, was established after World War II, and that was a CIA campaign to be sure that the media was under the control of the people in power and the CIA. And it's amazing how many people, when they hear that, this is almost a trauma in itself to hear that we do not have a free press. And so we have these external forces. We have people muddying the waters with information that is ridiculous. And we have cognitive infiltration, in other words. And so we have both external and internal forces. And so when the media is controlled, then an individual journalist may want to publish something about 9/11. They may want to publish about the nanothermite being found in the dust, but it will not get published because the people on the board of that particular media outlet is not going to allow it to be published. So is that answering your question at all?
Yes, it does, because it kind of goes back to what I was talking about last week with our guest John O'Malley, and how, in my opinion, the media attracts the kind of people, like the media in the sense that we see it on television and in print today, attracts the kind of people that want to be there, not necessarily because they're the next Edward R. Murrow and they want to seek the truth, and no matter where it leads, but simply because they want to be famous. That's in their personality, that's the button that's getting pushed, and they're more inclined to go along and toe the company line, even if it's not the right thing. And because that's what gets valued in our culture. And I find it kind of sick. I mean, it's always been that way. I recognize it for being sick now as an adult, but that's what we value, is fame and power and money above all else. I'm not saying there aren't exceptions to the rule, but there's very few of them. And that, whereas if you end up pursuing this path that we're on, you're not necessarily going to get your face on the billboard or on the television screen. You'll feel better about yourself, but you're not going to get those kind of material rewards that the sellout door promises you on the other side. So I mean, that kind of reinforces what I'm already thinking. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think you're right, Andy, and it's the values of our society. It's more important to be quote unquote successful. We also may have a family to feed, and we may be very scared to lose our jobs because of that. But then when it gets to the higher levels, of for people, for example, Dan Rather and the people who are Bill Moyers and Amy Goodman and people like that, we don't know what's stopping them. But is it fear of losing that success, fear of losing being famous, fear of losing their voice, fear of losing their job? Is have they been threatened, in some way? In other ways that are more dire, have their families been threatened if they speak out? I just don't know, but I think your analysis is certainly a good one. It is cultural to want the money, to want the fame, to want to be that talking head on the TV, more than it is to follow your own conscience.
Now, I want to get into your articles, and listeners can go to ae911truth.org. There's been a few parts of it put out. It's being put out in many different chapters. Some of them have already been published on the site. Some are yet to come, so the audience can look forward to seeing them. But the title overall of all the chapters is Why Do Good People Become Silent or Worse About 9/11? Now, I know you cover a lot of ground. We're going to start with a macro view of your work here, of what you're trying to accomplish and put through to the audience with your writing, and then boil it down. So overall, if you could just say it in a short summary, why do good people become silent or worse about 9/11? What is it about, and what is the audience, or what should they be taking from it?
Well, I've covered it in about 75 pages. It started out to be an article that was going to be probably 1 or 2 or 3 pages, and then I just couldn't stop writing. And people kept sending me subjects to research and giving me books to read, and as I did, I got into it more and more, and it just grew and grew. So I cover social psychology, which is denial, cognitive dissonance, conformity, groupthink. I cover brain research. I cover, under social psychology, I cover terror management theory, systems justification theory, and then clinical psychology. Why do people learn to be helpless? Have they been abused so much in their life that they just feel weak? They don't feel powerful. What traumas do traumas play a role in here that makes us dissociate when we hear people talking about 9/11? And then how does all this play in and relate to the belief, the myth of American exceptionalism? And so I cover a lot of different, as you say, a lot of ground, and I come at it from a different lens, and trying to answer the same question from a different lens, and so they overlap. But generally, if I could boil it all down to one thing, it would be fear. Fear is the emotion that stops people from speaking about this taboo subject of 9/11. And that fear manifests for different reasons, but in the end it comes down to the fear gets the best of us and runs our life. And as I pointed out, if we're on a journey of growth, of psycho-spiritual growth in our life, we become aware of the fear, but we don't let it run our lives. We're going to feel fear. That's part of the human condition, but we don't let it run our lives. So
right, and it says, and to cite another movie, and I say movies a lot because I think that artists and writers, even amidst all the fluff, have some deep thoughts that they kind of sneak into some of these things, and there's a lot of truth in fiction. That's why we study literature in English classes, to get at the core of what makes people tick, what's in people's soul. And they say this in Star Wars, fear is the quickest way to the dark side, something like that. I totally believe that's true, because I think that underlies every kind of violent act that people do in some way. A guy gets angry at his wife and murders her. There's some kind of fear basis there. Maybe he's afraid she's going to leave him. He's afraid of being alone. Maybe he's afraid that she'll take the kid. Something like that. Somebody robs a liquor store. Well, they're afraid that they're not going to have the money to pay the bills, that they're going to starve or something like that. So, yeah, I totally agree, and that is a very profound yet simple statement, and I think it's one of those things that when people hear it, they automatically, it's like a lock, or a key goes into a lock and just clicks right into place, and you're like, yeah, that's exactly it. And when you realize that, and you just ask yourself, why am I afraid right now? What's the basis of my anger right now? Most of the times it's being afraid of something. It's some kind of internal insecurity. And, the 75 or so pages of your long essay, is going to be the foundation of what I think is going to be, in the future, a major study of psychological history, of even American history, when they're going to be writing volumes on this time in our nation's history right now, about what was going on in people's heads. How did they ignore this obvious evidence for so long? It's going to be right up there with what with studying the people of Germany during the Holocaust. And you provide some historical references in your essays and what you've released so far. So I'm going to have you go into that. Talk about some of the experiments, such as the Milgram experiment. I've covered it a little bit on this show, but I want you to talk about it and some of the other experiments that you cited in the chapters that you so far published.
Right. This was the chapter that was just published, I believe, was it this month or last month? I can't remember, about obeying and believing authority. And it's, I think, an especially fascinating chapter for us, for any human being, really, but for us as 9/11 truth skeptics and activists. And Stanley Milgram, back in the early 1960s, really wanted to answer the question: how did the Germans, how did Hitler and Eichmann and all these people actually commit all these atrocities? Could it be that Eichmann and his accomplices of the Holocaust were just following orders? Could we call them accomplices? Why did they do this? And are they any different from us? So he did this experiment in which an actor was supposed to be a student and was hooked up to electrical wires that would supposedly send him pain when the subject of the experiment pushed the button. So the subject of the experiment thought that both he and the learner were both participating in the experiment as subjects, but actually the one receiving the shock was an actor. So when the subject, or called the teacher, would ask a question, if the learner got it wrong, he would push a button that would give him electric shock. And what is fascinating, and the shocks would increase in intensity as the experiment would go on. What quote unquote shocked us all is that 2/3 of these subjects acting as teachers would shock this learner to the maximum voltage of 450 volts, which could have been lethal. And they all believed this person to have a heart condition. At the end, this person, who was an actor, was beating on the wall and yelling, "Let me out of here, I'm going to die." And yet, if the person in the white lab coat said, "Keep pushing the button, you must go on," 2/3 of them would go to the very extreme voltage of 450 volts. No one ever suspected that would be the case. So what we learned about ourselves as human beings, as social creatures, is that we will follow authority even in the face of disobeying our most cherished social values, our most, of hurting another person, especially a person who's helpless. So that was amazing. I remember learning about it, as I said in my essay, and when I was in college in the 60s, and was shocked to learn that people would do that, and realized that I probably would have been one of those people that followed the authorities' orders, because that's what I had been taught as a child growing up in a family that was fairly authoritarian. I was taught that you obey authority. So from that moment, I changed my life, really. So that was the one you're talking about. And then we go into Jane Elliott, and in the essay, and this was stunning, how she separated her students and said those with brown eyes are superior, those with blue eyes are inferior, and they actually put collars on the necks of some of these third-grade students who had blue eyes, and within a day's time, within hours, those students thought they were inferior, and the brown-eyed students thought they were superior, and their work in school reflected the same. You know, the work in school of the brown-eyed kids was better, and the work of the blue-eyed children was inferior. And then she switched it the next day, and the same thing happened in reverse. Probably people couldn't do that experiment today, but it was good she did, because we learned how much an authority can affect how we think about ourselves. So
right. I don't mean to interrupt you, but as even a perceived authority, even somebody who's not even really an authority. There was a case that was on one of these news shows, Dateline or 2020, a couple years ago I saw, where a guy calling from a payphone using some calling cards, he called a McDonald's, and he got the manager on the line. He pretended to be a police officer, and he said that one of her employees had stolen some cash from the register, if I remember right. And to make a long story short, I'm not going to go into all of the gory details of it, but he got this manager who was, I would say, a woman in her 40s, obviously in a position of authority there herself, got her to strip search a 16, 17, or 15-year-old girl in the back room based on the orders of somebody pretending to be a police officer on the phone. And the woman, she went to court over this. So there was a lot of stuff that happened as a result of this supposed prank that this guy was doing, and he ended up getting caught. But the manager's defense was that, I thought he was a police officer. That voice, I just couldn't ignore it. I couldn't, because it was so hypnotic. I just was so scared, and I wanted to go along with the police officer said. I don't think that defense works for her. Just like in Nuremberg, I was just following orders was not a good defense either, and got some people hanged. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, very good. I had forgotten about that. I read about that as well.
Now, I want to kind of look at the different chapters in your study. And again, we can't get into all of it, obviously, in the time that we have, but there's something interesting, and you covered this in one of your chapters exclusively, diffusion of innovations. Right. What does that mean? How does that apply to the 9/11 situation?
Well, it really applies in a wonderful way. And by the way, I want to just revert back a little bit to the obeying and believing authority. And what that says for us as 9/11 skeptics and truth activists is that we're up against a lot. We as human beings are trained to believe and listen to authority. So when our government's telling us one thing, we're going against the authority. So it appears to be genetically encoded in us to obey authority. So it really shows us what an uphill journey we have, and yet we're still making that journey, and we're doing quite well with it.
I want to ask you, before you get into the diffusion of innovations, do you think that our upbringing in terms of our culture and maybe even our school system may play a part in that?
Oh, I absolutely do. And I think it is genetic because, as I showed in my article, I mean, children automatically look to their parents for to know if a situation is safe or not. And then chimpanzees and bonobos all have leaders, and they're very closely related to us genetically. But I feel it definitely has something to do with how we are raised. If we are raised so that our feelings are respected, our wants are respected, not that we get everything we want, that's not what I mean, but that who we are is seen and respected, then we have a solid sense of self, and we can more likely listen to ourselves rather than authority. Like I have one friend who's a psychologist who said, yes, we taught our children, we made sure they knew and learned empathy, even though that's genetically wired in us to have empathy. They went to the extra trouble to say things like to their children, now how do you think that person feels, when that happened, And so they helped educate their children to tune in to how other people feel. And I think if we all did that in our families and our educational system, our ability to be empathetic with people would be highly increased, and we would never shock a person, to the death, as the Milgram subjects did. So yeah, I think it's very important.
Oh, with diffusion of innovation, we'll let you go into that.
Yeah, this is a fascinating anthropological study in which cultures it was studied to see how does new information get into a culture. And what these anthropologists found was that it doesn't matter what culture it is, whether it's our American culture, whether it's a village in Peru, whatever the culture is, they found that the people in that culture fell within a neat bell curve. And what they found is that a very small percentage of each of these cultures, 2.5%, were very open to new ideas and to new ways of thinking. And this could even include what we call paradigm shifting ideas, and ideas that shift the way we think about the world. Only 2.5% of people in each of these cultures would be so open to new ideas, and they called these people the innovators. Now, these people didn't usually affect the rest of the population, but there's another group that came along and within each culture called the early adopters, and these people usually held some kind of esteem within the society. These were people that the rest of the society would listen to, and these early adopters would listen to the innovators and then use their own judgment and decide whether this new idea had value or not. And then when these early adopters, which is only 13.5% of each population, started talking about it, then the rest of the society would listen. So that's why it's so important that we have people with who are prominent in our society talk about 9/11 and say that we need a new investigation. That's why patriotsquestion911.com is such an important website. So then the next group is called the early majority. That's 34% of the population would listen to these early adopters, and then they would eventually adopt this new idea. The next group of people is called the late majority. It's another 34%. And they really come on board only because it's practical to do so. They haven't really done a lot of thinking about it, but they just do so because they just kind of follow along and it's practical to do so. And then there's 16% who's called laggards, and these folks do not ever change their minds. So that's what the Diffusion of Innovation study found. It was evidently thought well enough, people thought well enough of it that it's being used in business so that when there's a new technology, for example, devised in Silicon Valley or wherever, they use this model to get this new device, this new idea, this new way of doing things accepted within the culture. So that I hope that wasn't confusing, but
no, it's not confusing. It's very interesting, and I don't know what to. It kind of leaves me at a crossroads personally when I think about just the how big the situation is and how you have 300 million minds that you're trying to influence, or at least a majority of them, within the United States of America. And you mentioned before reaching out to prominent people that people
right.
follow the stars. That's why I think they probably call them stars, is people follow the stars and monkey see, monkey do. What are other ways? Because I hear different debates about this, whether or not it's better to talk about it calmly with folks or to go with the method that some people use where it's almost like it's a burning house. The roof is on fire over you. What do? You scream fire and get people out. And I've had people tell me, I was on a show back in 2006 or 2007 with a debunker who, most of the show was just him constantly asking me, do you really believe in all this? But one thing he did say that kind of stuck with me is, if you really believe this, why isn't it not everything that you do every day? I mean, how can you be so calm about it? And actually, I mean, right now, as it is kind of like most of what I do all the time now is this. But that's an interesting question, because I would think that if I was running away from a psychopath serial killer like a Michael Myers type, and I run into a police station, I'd be out of breath and screaming and hysterical like Jamie Lee Curtis there. So, what is a good way to reach out to all these people? Is it presenting the danger and the urgency, or is it to calmly talk to people, or is it a mixture of both? How do you sort all of this out?
Well, that's a good question, and I personally don't. First of all, I don't think if we scream at people and call them names that we're going to get very far. We have to win people over somehow. We have to make it safe for them to listen. And screaming at people and calling them names may do something for us. It may help us vent our frustration, but I don't think it's going to do much for winning them over. That's just my take on it. That's how I write about this in my article too, in my essay. How can we communicate more effectively? And I give quite a few suggestions. So that's we just need to, whatever we do, we do not need to push people away. So that's just kind of my answer to that. That's where I come down on that issue.
That's the answer I was hoping you would give. I agree with you completely. Is that people will automatically turn off if they feel like they're being accused of something, if they feel that they're under fire, or that they have a reason to be afraid from what somebody is saying. I think with people doing things, constantly talking about this all the time, like folks calling into C-SPAN all the time, a day after day, and bringing this up, shows the urgency of the situation while still calmly, keeping their cool and being professional. And I really think that is the method. That's the method of the AE 9/11 truth brings to the table, and just sticking to the science. So, I mean, I'm glad that you gave that answer. That's what I agree with. But you see this kind of dilemma presented in people's minds. And, for me, you talk about people's buttons being pushed and people getting desperate. I think a lot of folks get angered by the facts or just the notion of, why are we having to deal with this? Why is our justice system not working? Why are we getting haircuts and shining our shoes to go talk to a congressman to get him to do his job? And I think that contributes a lot to people's anger, to people's desperation, and kind of coming off sometimes as a little off the rails, because they want people to understand this. They want to put this in the past. And I guess this leads into my next question. I anytime I have anybody with a expertise in psychology, I try to use this time to provide some self-help for people in the movement, people who may have to deal with knowing all of this, but may be surrounded in their immediate society where they live by folks who may ridicule them, may not want to even hear this, may go completely quiet and avoid them because they've talked about this in the past, because the society and the mass peer pressure has had that effect to try to isolate someone that talks about this from their peers. So talking to people within the movement who have to deal with knowing this while the society furiously tries to keep it guarded and not acknowledge this reality, what would you say to them in terms of getting along day-to-day life, coping, and still being happy? Because you need to be happy in life, even if you know about this and are actively trying to do something about it. You're on this planet to enjoy your life, folks. But how do you stay happy and stay positive, I guess, is what I want to ask, despite this situation, despite the battle that you're fighting?
Well, great question, and I'll just see what comes off the top of my head here. And I agree. I think we have to somehow find our center. We have to be centered. We have to be have a positive outlook, and because this is our life, this is our one life. We don't want to live it being angry and frustrated for the rest of our lives. So there's many different ways each individual can go, depending on that individual and what he or she might need. First of all, I'm learning this myself. I'm trying to learn it anyway, is to keep my life balanced. Whatever that is, how do I keep it balanced? For me, it's going to be something completely different from someone else. But to not just spend every minute of our day learning about all the negative things there are, what is it that will also nourish me? Is it doing something creative? Is it learning about a whole different subject that gives me hope for humanity? For example, I've been studying near-death experiences, and people kind of go, wow, Fran, that's how that's a crazy way to remain balanced. But it does. It's the good news, about what happens to people when they die, and I'm just fascinated by it. And it gives me, I think part of this is finding the bigger picture rather than being so myopic about where we are. Look at the bigger picture. What's the bigger picture? Who are we as human beings? Try to find a bigger picture so that you aren't just inundated with all this negativity, this negative information. There's also finding healing. As a psychotherapist, I believe very strongly in our need to heal. If we don't heal ourselves individually, our society will never be healed, because a society that's healed depends on the individuals being healed. So if we find ourselves going off in the deep end, and I've seen 9/11 truth activists, I've seen them become actually mentally ill because of this subject. And I just feel the need, I see the need for all of us to find a way to heal ourselves. And that's going to be different for every human being. Every human being will choose a different path. For me, it's depth psychology. It's regressing back to my past traumas that have been activated. And that did happen for me. 9/11 did activate old traumas, and I have gone back into therapy, and I have found those old traumas. And now what's really interesting is it's even worse than when I first started doing the activism now. Things have gotten worse, not better. And yet I don't feel the anxiety that I did before. So I highly recommend healing. If you don't want to go that route, there's always support groups. Dorothy Lorig, who's one of the psychologists and experts, Speak Out, one of the psychology professionals, runs what's called a reevaluation counseling, which I call a grassroots therapy. And it's people who get together and they share their feelings with each other. And it's very experiential. And so that's a way you can grow without spending money going to a psychologist or a therapist. So being creative, healing yourself, finding balance in whatever way you can is very, very important. I think this issue, this 9/11 issue, can challenge us so deeply that it really, we can see it as an opportunity, really. It will change all of us, and let's hope it changes us for the better, that we become better people, that we become more healed people, rather than for the worse. So that's kind of what's coming out of me.
Right, and I say this to the audience: you don't want to make yourself another victim of 9/11 either.
There you
obviously,
go. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and that is. I mean, because every week I say, do as much as you can, and please do as much as you can, but at the same time, you got to enjoy your life too. And so there's a balance. I even find the balance too. You got to have a sense of humor as well. I have, we make jokes and have fun all the time, even though it's a terrible subject, it's a terrible reality. But you've got to just try to, just stay centered. I mean, that's the best way I can say it. And don't take yourself too seriously. And I find that as I'm getting older now, is that it's a lot easier for me to just kind of deal and have a sense of humor about everything as we go along, because you just have to. I think we get a sense of humor as a gift for dealing with all the problems in life. And, and so, folks, you just got to basically try to be the same person that you were before you realize this, and realize that the world is not a reflection of you. And there's a John Lennon song. I think it's John Lennon or the Beatles. I don't know which incarnation of John Lennon produced the song, but it was "Let It Be." And there's a line in that song that says, even though this night is cloudy, the light still shines over me. I always butcher song lyrics, but basically there's still a light is shining over him, even though it's raining on his head, even though it's cloudy. You're still that light in the darkness, and that's what you need to be in this dark period in history. So I agree with you completely. I also, Fran, I want to get your opinion on this. What burnout? How do you avoid activist burnout? Because people may feel inclined to push themselves right to the very limit, not just fixating on the horror of the situation, but trying to do as much as they can to remedy it, feeling that they need to single-handedly change the situation. What are some steps people can take to avoid burning themselves out and staying strong and staying in this fight?
Right. And I think that just is very much what we've been talking about, the answer to that. And first of all, this dark point in history, if we start looking at history, we will see that our history is full of dark points. It's like, think about living in the Roman Empire and Caesar killing 1 million people in Gaul. I mean, human history has been incredibly dark. And I'm not sure this is a more dark period than any other period, really. So that helps give us, a little more of the big picture, too. And all we can do is keep shining our light and doing what our own conscience directs us to. And how to avoid burnout, that's a good question, because I'm trying to learn that myself. And I think one thing is when you say we cannot do it ourselves. We can only do our part. And if we think we're going to do this ourselves, I'm guessing that we are being motivated by I'm just going to guess that we're being motivated by some inner trauma that we're not aware of that makes us come at this issue with such urgency that we're really running off of fear rather than off of love. And so the fear that is brought up from our old trauma could be what's running us when that situation occurs. And that will burn us out really quickly. So the need for growth, the need for becoming aware, self-awareness, the need for healing is so important to help us avoid this burnout. And so that's all I can say is that it's really, really very important. What can we? Maybe that's not what it is. Maybe for us, we just need to go. I'm from Colorado, so maybe we need to go skiing every weekend. Maybe we need to balance our lives. We need to go play tennis. We need to do something that balances our lives to avoid the burnout. So it pretty much plays into the question we were talking about before. How do we keep ourselves balanced? How do we heal? How do we find the bigger picture? For me, finding the bigger picture by studying near-death experiences, finding the bigger picture of who we are as human beings, has just been huge for me. It's reduced my fear of death. It has shown me that we are spiritual beings first and having a physical experience. And it's just, it's been huge for me as far as giving me the bigger picture. And therefore, in a way, I can't even say more courage, just it's more natural just to be who I am and act from my conscience.
Right, and I'll say this to the audience. I found, too, as I get older, that the universe tends to, for whatever reason, if you want to think it's God or karma or whatever, the universe tends to help you out if you try your hardest. And so I guess the message there is just trust. Trust that everything's going to be okay, just like that Duran Duran song. You got to believe that everything's going to be all right in the end. And I remember that as I left Uzbekistan when I was in the Peace Corps, we got early terminated because there was a massacre there. There was all this other stuff. But that song was playing as we were leaving. It gave me a real sign of hope. And I tell everybody, Google that or go on YouTube and look up that song. I want you to leave with that message. It would probably be good ending music. I don't want to mess with the copyright gods by playing it out, but I want you guys to listen to that tonight because everything will be okay. You just got to try your hardest to expose this, and I really think things are going to fall into place. Fran, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Free Fall. It's been a great interview. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Thanks so much, Andy.
Thanks for listening. Remember, you can hear this program every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. You can also download the program by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.
How about the 9/11 Commission, which was tasked with giving us the fullest explanation? No, not one sentence in the 571 pages of the 9/11 Commission report even mentions the destruction of World Trade Center 7. Is this one of the reasons, perhaps, that Senator Max Klingland resigns from the commission, citing it's a national scandal? The investigation is compromised. How about expert corroboration? How about Danny Jawenko, 27-year controlled demolitions expert? It starts from below. They've simply blown away the columns. It's controlled demolition. A team of experts did this. It's professional work, without a doubt. How about Hugo Bachmann, Professor Emeritus, Chairman, Department of Structural Dynamics at Earthquake Engineering, Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. In my opinion, the building, World Trade Center 7, was with great probability professionally demolished. Here's a floor plan of Building 7. Now, to bring a building smoothly, symmetrically into its own footprint without falling over, what we have to do is remove the core columns, because what we want to do is bring the outside of the building in on itself. Now, this involves a high degree of precision that fire is not capable of, being an organic process.